this is basically a mock-up of a presentation I'll be giving at HLS, the Hispanic Linguistic Symposium, in 2 weeks. I'm going to do the sort of rambly long-form version, and in 2 weeks I have to cut it down to 20 minutes. Title of the presentation is Silenciadas, Placing, Erasure, and Recovery in Nuevo Mexico and Abroad. I'm mostly going to be talking about the first aspect, the erasure, but we can talk about recovery as well in the Q&A. So, start off with the theoretical concept that I'm utilizing. The idea of toponymic silencing comes from a tradition in geography, historiography, cartography, critical toponymy. There's a number of traditions that use this, research traditions that use this concept. But basically, I would define it as a set of representational practices by hegemonic actors by which the place names of minoritized or subjugated groups are obscured, erased, and delegitimized. Let's break that definition down. So, representational practices, that is semiotics. This is production of signs and signifiers. Map production is sort of what I'm most interested in, but that also includes road signage. It includes the use of place names in public discourse, use of place names in historical texts. If you're talking about the Civil War in New Mexico, and you're talking about the Battle of Glorieta Pass, Glorieta Pass was not a name that was in use at that time. That's an anachronistic name, and it's telling you something about sort of the angle from which these events are viewed, right? By hegemonic agents, colonial governments, military dictatorships, the capitalist class, any kind of actors like that, the Catholic Church. If you look at the Nuevo Mexicano case and you try to think, you know, did this thing of toponymic silencing happen with Nuevo Mexicano settlers coming in and indigenous languages? To a certain extent, and mostly enacted by the Catholic Church. Places like Quehua that become Santo Domingo Pueblo, right? Pueblo de Santo Domingo. Traditional Queres name is Quehua. That obscure by altering. So, you know, Sierra de La Sierra de las Truchas becomes the Truchas Peak, so it obscures the traditional name. Right? That erased by omitting, so there's names in oral usage that are just not represented on the map, and that delegitimized by making unofficial the toponymic oral traditions of the minoritized and subjugated groups. Right? So you've got these techno-bureaucratic institutions like the U.S. Geological Survey that say these are the official names, and these other names are alternates, or they're not real, right? In some way not official, and so not legitimate. Here's a picture sort of a map in the Pecos Wilderness. A couple names on here. It's pretty small for you guys, but I'll read them out. So out here, this mountain is El Picacho del Norte de la Sierra de las Truchas. It's just called Truchas Peak. That one would be North Truchas Peak, I think. Anyway, Chimayosos Peak is actually El Cerro de los Chimayosos, or for some people, El Cerro Colorado. Some people, there's a group of mountains called Los Cerros Colorados. The river here is the Rio Santa Barbara, which has 3 forks. On the official map, they're called West Fork, Middle Fork, and East Fork. Local people do not actually distinguish the forks, they distinguish the canyons. Cañón del Valle, Cañón del Medio, Cañón de la Tierra. This lake here is called No Fish Lake. This sort of smaller box canyon that jumps off the side, called El Rincón Hondo. and sort of over here, this is a cliff face, cliff band. It's called Los Clifes. The name that was used by the last generation of shepherds that ran sheep in this area. And so, Los Clifes, Rincón Hondo, Cerros Colorados, those names are absent from the map, right? So those are omitted. Up there, the Rio Santa Barbara is misspelled. It doesn't have the accent mark on Rio. And that holds for all the rios, all over New Mexico, all over the United States. Chimayosos Peak is a translation, right? Sort of semi-translation where Chimayosos is left in Spanish. No Fish Lake could be a New English name, could be a translation of a Spanish antecedent that I have not been able to discover, could be like La Laguna Sin Truchas. But sort of that is what this looks like on an actual map. Picacho del Norte and becomes Truchas Peak is another semi-translation. El Cerro Pelado outside Santa Fe becomes Santa Fe Baldy, which is a full translation. Sort of things like that. So toponymic silencing, repeating again, is a semiotic process, but it accompanies material disenfranchisement, right? This is sort of bringing in some Marxist theory. Material disenfranchisement of these groups, the dissolution of territorial sovereignty, right? Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo. The deprivation of private and communal land ownership that was done by the Court of Private Land Claims between 1891 and 1904. They recognized about 5% of claimed communal lands. And the denial of economic access to the traditional land base, which is posterior to that. So for the area that I work on, important events are the foundation of the Santa Fe National Forest in 1917 and the Pecos Wilderness Area in 1958. We cover sort of the same area. The wilderness area is part of the National Forest. But sort of these institutions, these government institutions, restrict access. They start asking for permits to do sheep herding, where before that was open access. And sort of different. And as a result, they're able to undermine traditional economies, sort of subsistence-based economies in these communities, and incorporate them into capitalism as exploitable labor. And so what I want to do today is sort of compare that situation, which is sort of what my original research is on, with information that I found out about 3 other cases. I'm going to look at Spain, I'm going to look at occupied Palestine, and I'm going to look at Swedish and Norwegian Sápmi. And we'll get into what that is at the end. So dictatorial Spain, that's Franco, but also, very importantly, the first dictatorship, which is 1923 to 1930 under Primo de Rivera. This is a guy, Galician historian, and he writes, El nacionalismo español se manifestó en una campaña de recastilianización, cuyo empuje comenzó sobre todo bajo la dictadura de Primo de Rivera. Fue en aquellos años, y no durante el franquismo, cuando los ingenieros de caminos alteraron buena parte de los nombres del lugar de Galicia para darles un sonido más castellano. Right? And so they're theorizing this as re-Castilianization. So if we look at, this is a linguistic map of Spain, these are sort of the minority language areas, right? Gallego, Asturiano, Euskera, Aragonés, Aranés, which is a dialect of Languedoc, sort of the southern French language, and then Catalan, right? Those are the minority languages. They're all repressed under Franquismo, but the sort of the starting of the sort of in the map production, when they start changing the names, is really under Primo de Rivera. And to kind of point out the re-Castilianization thing, so this is sort of the evolution of where, sort of the expansion of Castilian language. And you can see all these places, sort of Galicia, Astur-Leonés, Basque, Aragonés, Catalan. They're not really Castilian, ever, right? They're Castilian by virtue of military expansion of Castile. So the Instituto Geográfico Nacional is created in 1870 and then becomes sort of the main institution that implements this re-Castilianization. How does that happen? So I'll just give you guys some examples. I won't have examples for I don't really have a lot of examples for the Norwegian and Sápmi, and the Palestinian, but I have a lot of examples for Spain. So you get translations, right? Rivas pequeñas becomes rivas pequeñas. Phonetic Castilianization, Ourense, Ourense. Orthographic Castilianization, rivas altas to rivas altas. Morphological Castilianization, in there. Os castelos, los castelos. So you've got os changing to los, but castelos not changing to castillos. Sort of some weird openness to linguistic hybridity there. And then you've got glorification of Franco, right? You've got this place, Uferol, which is the city where Franco was born, which becomes El Farol del Caudillo, which was Franco's nickname as a dictator. Toponymic silencing in Asturias, right? You get translations. It's called Les Cabañas becomes Las Cabañas. You know, that's an arguable thing. Is that phonological integration into Spanish? Is that translation into Spanish? Because these languages are so closely related, sort of defining the actual linguistic strategies used is kind of difficult sometimes. Phonetic, and I would say orthographic Castilianization, Ho Santo, which is this place in the Picos de Europa, becomes Ho Santo. Ho is related to the word hoyo, is a karstic bowl. In Catalonia, orthographic and phonetic Castilianization. Girona becomes Gerona, right? Partial translation, La Collada del Pas del Corro becomes El Collado del Pas del Corro, right? So the word for a pass, collada, is translated and made masculine to follow the Spanish pattern. But pas is not translated to paso, again, sort of showing that linguistic hybridity. And then in Euskadi, you've got the exclusive use of exonyms. So a city called Gasteiz becomes Vitoria. Today is known with a hyphenated Vitoria-Gasteiz. You get this sort of feeble morphological Castilianization. This is from a source, Goicoechea, 1984. He says Gandia, which is a neighborhood somewhere, becomes Gandias with a morphological plural S, which is not a feature of Basque. Phonologically motivated adaptations. This is a sort of border town next to France. Hondarribia becomes Fuenterrabía. Hondarribia, Fuenterrabía. Hondarribia has nothing to do with a spring, so there's no semantic motivation. It's purely phonological. And then some Castilian names are actually Basque names that were borrowed in olden times and didn't follow the sound changes that happened in Basque. Bilbao becomes Bilbo in modern Basque, but stays Bilbao in Spanish because it was borrowed before that sound change. You get to post-dictatorial Spain. Franco dies. You get the creation of the Spanish Constitution, which says the regional languages will be co-official in their respective territories. This becomes legislated by the comunidades autónomas, who also legislate the official status of traditional toponymy. But there's sort of differing degrees to which they do that. The first one is the law from Galicia. Os topónimos de Galicia terán como única forma oficial a galega. Right? The only official form will be the Galician one. Whereas in Asturias, interestingly, they're writing the law in Spanish, not in Asturiano. Los topónimos de la Comunidad Autónoma del Principado de Asturias tendrán la denominación oficial en su forma tradicional, cuando un topónimo tenga uso generalizado en su forma tradicional y en castellano, la denominación podrá ser bilingüe. So they're allowing for sort of bilingual official status. So how does that situation compare to New Mexico? There's an entanglement of place name manipulation and deprivation of land ownership and management rights. In Galicia, you get the caciques. This is stories from Eva at the department. You get the caciques, and the sort of Instituto Geográfico Nacional comes through and surveys the land, surveys especially owned land plots, and categorizes them as de primera, de segunda, de tercera, according to their perceived quality, right? But they don't take measurements. They don't look at what is the soil composition. They don't look at, is there water on this land? They ask the cacique. And the cacique says, oh, these lands, they're all great. They happen to be mine. These lands, they're terrible. They belong to other people. And what that does is today, those lands that were categorized as terrible, their resale value is lower, right? Because this is formalized into how these lands are priced. It's embedded in wider projects of forced language shift, right? Children being beaten for speaking Spanish here, Gallego there, Basco there, Catalan there, right? And you've also got the glorification of alpha males from the hegemonic group, right? You've got El Farol del Caudillo. Here you've got Mount Taylor. Mount Taylor is named for Zachary Taylor, the general who invaded Mexico. Right? The Spanish name is La Sierra de San Mateo, I would say. Yeah. It's one of the four evangelists, San Mateo, I want to say. And it's because it's one of the four sacred mountains of the sacred cardinal mountains of the Navajo people. And so Catholic Nuevo Mexicanos come in, they map that sacred four onto the evangelists, and they name it for one of the evangelists. Differences. Languages are more closely related in Spain than they are here. And so it's harder to distinguish the exact linguistic strategies. And there's arguments in Spain that these regional languages are really just dialects of Spanish. And then in Spain, it's a late development of Castilian nationalism, whereas here in Nuevo Mexico, it's an early feature of colonial occupation and colonial domination. And formal contestation is largely absent in New Mexico, whereas it's very much present in Spain. Some issues with that formal contestation are like which variety of the local languages are they using? Are they saying, my impression is that especially for Catalunya, you get this really strong centralizing impulse where the names of places in the Pyrenees are not in Pyrenean Catalan, but in Barcelona Catalan. And so you've got this new layer of erasure going on. Turning to occupied Palestine. Okay, basic history. Palestinian territories become occupied after the Israeli-Palestinian War of 1948 and the Six-Day War of 1967, which is the Golan Heights. And I'm going to draw on two sources here, Azaryahu and Golan, two sort of Israeli-American writers. And they talk, their article's called Renaming the Landscape, the Formation of the Hebrew Map of Israel. They're aligning with Israel, they're aligning with that. And then Ghazi Falah, who's Palestinian, writing the 1948 Israeli-Palestinian War and its aftermath, the transformation and designification of Palestine's cultural landscape. Obviously, this person is aligning ideologically with Palestine. Falah, sort of talking about that concept of landscape designification, writes that mindful of the centrality of control of the landscape and its meanings for political hegemony, Israeli authorities pursued a strategy which, by removing past cultural traces of other peoples from the landscape, undercut and weakened Palestinian claims to this territory. A strategy of designification. Doesn't really define that term in his text. I would define it as the attempt to remove or subvert from a landscape any and all signifiers belonging to subordinated social groups, iconic and indexical of that social group's past sovereignty. It's a bit dense, but basically, if there's no symbols of the Palestinians on the landscape, then the Palestinians were never there. And that takes physical form in Palestine. This is a picture of the Palestinian village of Al-Khaima in 1990. There's nothing. Right? This village was depopulated and then bulldozed. Other things that happen, they start forest plantations over the top of depopulated villages. They set these up as charities for reforestation of Israel. And they get international support from charity. They settle into forced depopulated villages. They change the name into some new Hebrew name, right? And they change the physical aspects of it. If there's a mosque, they repurpose the mosque. He talks about a mosque that's been turned into a restaurant where they serve wine and beer. It's, Quran says you can't drink alcohol. They turn it into animal shelters, cow and pig sheds. You get the complete erasure of Palestinian Arabic toponymy, especially for natural features. If there's a cliff face, if there's a river, if there's a mountain, and it has an Arabic name, it's not going to appear on the map. But there is sort of the Palestinian Authority has a parallel cartography using the Arabic. So there is some, again, formal contestation here. And the other author is talking about the creation of the Hebrew map of Israel, right? Again, technocratic institution, governmental names commission, formed in 1949, tasked with creating a comprehensive Hebrew toponymy. It's a project of cultural engineering. The Hebrew toponymy does not come from popular usage. It's not people using these names and them going out and collecting what people use. It's them deciding these are going to be the names that people use. They override and erase vernacular place naming practice in Arabic, in English from the sort of English period, I forget what it's called. There's a period where the English have control over Palestinian territory. And then even Hebrew place names that were simply not recognized as Hebrew, just erased and overridden. You get abandoned village sites that are unnamed on the map, occupied village sites that are renamed in Hebrew, and Palestinian Arabic toponymy for natural features omitted from the map. I guess that's sort of repetitive. More interesting, the engineering of the Hebrew toponymy Right? You get reinstatement of historical names documented in scripture. Right? It's kind of difficult. They didn't have a lot of those. A lot of the problem was with locating where these places in scripture were. Like, where is this place? You get names referencing people from the Torah, from the Old Testament, or from the early Zionist movement. And you get the adaptation of Palestinian Arabic names through translation and phonetic approximation. That last is ideologized in a really interesting way. I'm going to talk about that first. So it's rationalized by a theory of toponymic continuity. Hebrew and Arabic belong to the same language family, Manito Semitic, and it's assumed that Arabic names used in Palestine were evolutions from prior Hebrew names, all of them. And therefore, those prior Hebrew names could be reconstructed, they could be recovered. And they employ sort of sophisticated sort of historical linguistics methodology compared to historical linguistics to arrive at those names. But obviously this is a fiction, right? Certainly some of those names had Hebrew origins, but definitely not a majority. Palestinian names are ideologized as foreign and threatening. This is from an early report by that organization, the Place Naming Commission or whatever they're called. The Negev, half of our country, was threatening in the foreignness of its place names, mostly Arabic. And these were also distorted and confused, some of them meaningless, some with negative connotations and even humiliating or condemning ones. These names were exuded foreign spirit. With the conquest of Eilat and the hoisting of the Israeli flag in Eilat, it became urgently needed to radically change the situation, to determine Hebrew names, to abolish foreign sounds, and to enrich the map of the Negev with original names, close to the heart of the Hebrew defender and settler of the Negev. Right? They're really strong colonial ideologies there. So, again, how does that compare to Nuevo Mexico? You've got sort of parallels in the sort of quasi-mythology of sort of colonial occupation, right? In Israel, you've got Zionism, return to the Promised Land. In the US, you've got manifest destiny, the idea that US settlers had the duty to civilize the West, right? And that translates in how these renaming projects occur, right? You get in both cases, you get the intentional erasure of undesired cultural imprints, right? So these place names, for villages especially, right? Place names for depopulated villages disappear in Palestine. In the US, this is wilderness, right? And we've got this policy, I don't know if policy here, talking about wilderness areas, and sort of their main point is that a fundamental characteristic of elemental wilderness is that the cultural overlay of civilization is absent, right? And so place names sort of deny that narrative, right? And so one of the practices that the U.S. Board on Geographic Names has done is they've said, if when we first made the map of this area, we didn't include a name on it, even if that name is in generalized local usage, we will not recognize it, because it doesn't match with our vision of wilderness areas as places where the cultural imprint of people is absent. Differences. Did I talk about? Yeah. Differences. Obviously, Palestine, you've got continuous military violence, military occupation. Here, it's not as direct, right? Names from phonological transfer in Palestine are technocratic. That is, they were designed because of this idea of toponymic continuity. If that occurs in New Mexico, which it does, it appears to be more of sort of a popular usage thing. Examples that I can think of is a place, city, village, town, I guess, called Angel Fire, which is traditionally Agua Fria. El Porvenir becomes Parkview. And those aren't, it's not the institutions saying this is what they are. That's sort of local Anglos trying to interpret what people are saying and just getting it all wrong. And then them being consulted as the supposed experts. Right? Hebrew purism, as opposed to linguistic hybridization in New Mexico. Right? This linguistic hybridization, it occurs in all the other cases. You see it in the Spanish case, and you'll see it in the Sápmi case as well. But that the Hebrew renaming is framed as restorative, right? There was this Hebrew toponymy earlier, we're going to restore that toponymy. That's not the case in Nuevo Me, right? Here the argument is about rationalization. There's too many different names for the same place, and that creates confusion. We should have just the one. Whereas it is similar to sort of the re-Castilianization argument that people are having in Spain, right? And then again, there's formal contestation by the Palestinian Authority. It's absent mostly from Nuevo Me. Last case, Sápmi, is the traditional territory of the Sámi people, which is an indigenous people of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and northwestern Russia. They speak a group of Finno-Ugric languages, about 10 of them. South Sámi, Ume Sámi, there's a list there. And they are traditionally a semi-nomadic reindeer herding group. These are some pictures. This is like traditional dress, and this is obviously more modern. But you can see they still have the little cap. And they're herding reindeer. I'm going to talk about two places, right? Two countries, and their approach is very different. Norway. You've got, right from the start, an official policy of Norwegianization of toponymy. Present-day efforts for official recognition are heavily contested. And there's methods for toponymic silencing identified by this linguist, Helander. She says there's omission. We know what omission is. You get the replacement by constructed Norwegian names, that is, places that did not have a Norwegian name in oral tradition. The technocratic institution decides a name. Or they translate the name from Sámi. Often that translation is an error because they don't know Sámi. And then she also talks about this really interesting concept called toponymic subjugation. She identifies it with sort of this line from an early sort of policy text written by the National Land Survey of Norway. Instead of alien place names, alien again, right? A Norwegian name should be used where it exists. If there is no Norwegian name, or it has not been established, a Norwegian translation will be registered as an original name of the location, and the alien name will be written in brackets. And that's, she notices, she looks at these maps, right? She notices that's applied, but it's only applied to natural features and not to man-made features. So this is a map that she shows. The lake Majejavi becomes Majavatnet, where Vatnet is the lake, or literally the water. And then the town that's next to it, Majavatn, is only written in Norwegian. The Sámi name is left off the map. Right? And that sort of, she argues, goes back to conceptualizations of land ownership rights. Right? These people are semi-nomadic, they don't have land ownership rights, so man-made features should not be in their language. These really sort of contortions of ideology. Sort of that idea of contested recognition, these are like, recently they've started doing multilingual road signs, and these are getting vandalized. Right? A bunch of Norwegian boys took the Sámi name of that one off, and they graffitied the other one. All right, jumping over to Sweden, an entirely different situation. This information is from Delun and Swedal. They're working with their sort of technocratic institution that's in charge of making maps. Right? They're working for the Lantmäteriet. There was never a formal policy of erasure. However, there's consistent problems with representation. And they stem from a technical problem, but also from ideological problems. So there's no formalized spelling for the Sámi languages until late in the 20th century that's agreed upon. Early period, right? 1895, 1960, Sámi names get translated into Finnish, right? Like I said, they're Finno-Ugric languages. They're related to Finnish, right? So you just translate them to a language that we do know how to spell. And if they're left in Sámi, the spelling is just all over the place, and it doesn't really correspond to any pronunciation patterns. 1960 to 2000, they designed this map orthography, and that's the word that they use. It's a single spelling for 4 different languages. It's designed to be readable by an average Swede with no knowledge of the Sámi language. And it's designed by non-linguists, non-Sámi people. And even still, it's contested by the Swedish Armed Forces. The army's not happy. We want the Swedish names to stay in place, or we want the Finnish names to stay in place. These other names are going to create confusion. It's going to, like, nah, we don't want them. And then, sort of in 2001, they started adopting the spelling systems that have been agreed upon by the indigenous governments. So, how does that compare to Nuevo Mexico? We've got striking similarities in the linguistic incompetence of government employees charged with documenting toponymy. People that did that work in New Mexico were not native speakers of Spanish, did not know the New Mexican dialect of Spanish, messed up all the time. Same in these places. And you've got this unified map orthography for 4 Sámi languages, which I think parallels sort of the deliberate omission of accent marks, which is like, you know, we don't care about spelling something the right way, but we also care about spelling something the right way because we're going to standardize your dialect forms. Whereas this one is like, they're homogenizing 4 different languages into one, right? This is the Swedish case. How is it different from Nuevo Mexico? You got that toponymic subjugation in Norway, whereas in the US, you've got this very strict one place, one name policy. If there's a name on the map, it'll be one name. And the same place cannot have multiple names on the map. There's this sort of workaround. There's an online database where they keep alternates, but nobody uses it, right? Nobody's seeing these signifiers on a map. And sort of, kind of a point I wanted to make at the start of the talk, but I'll make it now. There's this really central way in which maps form our imaginary of the world. You think of a metaphor like wiping something or someone off the map, or a place off the map, and it means destroying it. Right? So there's interesting things going on there. Another difference, especially for Sweden, is you've got this self-critical positioning, right? We're messing up. We messed up historically. How do we fix this? And they start talking with local indigenous governments and determining what are the spellings that you use, and how can we incorporate that. Compare that to this statement, which is from Personal Communication with a Board on Geographic Name Commission representative. She writes that names in Nuevo Mexico may not reflect correct usage of either English or Spanish, and don't necessarily have to. It really all comes down to what people use. Okay, conflating sort of correct usage with standard usage, right? One, but also purporting to be relying on popular usage, which is verifiably not the case. If you look at the actual records that they have, they consult with Forest Service employees, they consult with the Postal Service, they consult with the Bureau of Land Management, they don't consult with campesinos, they don't consult with pastores, they don't consult with the community, right? And again, you've got formal contestation in these Sápmi contests, which is absent from Nuevo Mexico. And I did not have time to make a concluding slide, but basically you can see that these processes, they're kind of universal, but they get particularized in really interesting ways that reflect, whether it's a colonial place, Nuevo Mexico, and Palestine, or a place that's not, you can't as easily define as colonial. Sápmi territories in Sweden and Norway, they've been co-occupied with Germanic peoples for 2,000 years. Can you really say that that is a colonial situation? There's parallels, but it's not quite the same. Same thing holds for Spain, right? Are these colonial occupations, or are they some other form of centralized domination? So yeah, any questions or comments?
I just have a question. What happens what do you suggest when there's multiple uses? For example, you brought up Mount Taylor. I grew up near Mount Taylor. It has like an Indohispano heritage. And those whole areas still have one of those hybrid names, the Salmon Tail Mountains is what we call it.
Yep.
But it also, like you said, it has an Navajo name, Topos. It also, I'm sure there's a name in Karis from Acoma and Laguna, very closely related, but technically different languages. As well as probably from Zuni. Zuni's only within 40 miles, 30 miles.
It's a part of Zuni mythology as well.
So what happens when you have such a complex identity? You have two colonial powers. One colonial power, which has now become a subjugating power.
Yes.
And then you have those 3 or 4 original occupiers of the region.
I think it really depends, and you've got to do consultation with the tribal governments. Most of these tribal governments are opposed to their languages being written down. They're opposed to people from outside the community knowing this information, right? And so there's a sense in which that erasure is also a matter of secrecy, and so not like choosing to put Xochitl on the map without consulting with the Navajo people would also be a violation of Navajo sovereignty. Anything else?
So do you have a sense of like the nature of like, that's an interesting question, like, when you get the colonial forces, it's always about like kind of dominating the mental universe of the subjugated people. But when you have multiple indigenous populations that have different names for Mount Taylor, do you get a sense it's less of, it just shows a totally different world view, like less of a like, this is mine, not yours? Or what?
Well, there's a reason why I focus on this sort of the technocratic
Yeah.
aspect of this, which is that these are government institutions realizing this change, which I think is different from popular place name usage, right? Which can reflect these very same ideologies, don't get me wrong, like, even saying Albuquerque in English and writing it without the R, right? That comes out of popular usage. That's not the US government saying, this is how you should spell it. But it's still denying these previously existing traditions, right? Where am I going? What the questions are?
It's just the nature of, multiple place names
Uh-huh.
coming from indigenous cultures as opposed to technocratic.
Right, whereas these other ones, they're really parallel systems, and there's no reason for them to overlap. And in fact, there's very likely, historically, a lot of mutual knowledge, where the Zuni knew the Keres name for the mountain, and the Keres knew the Zuni name for the mountain because of cultural exchange. And that's not necessarily in a conflict type situation. And there's no reason that these systems can't coexist, right? I would argue that the majority of Spanish place names in Nuevo Mexicano, in Nuevo Mexico, coexisted in that same sort of parallel sense, where they're not being imposed on the indigenous populations, they're just what the Nuevo Mexicano population is. And even that is very localized, what the people of these those three villages use, because they might talk about the same place with different names if their mutual contact is sporadic or for whatever reason.
Well, I'm just curious, Len, if you have some idea of some kind of resolution for some of these situations.
Right, that gets into sort of, all of this was from my comprehensive exam question that I wrote. And sort of the final reflection that I write up in there is that if, you've got to have this sort of contestation of this erasure, right? But if the goal of that contestation is going to be official recognition of traditional usage, you also have to have an institution that's willing to be self-critical, right? And I just don't see that happening here.
Especially now.
I mean, especially now. And so, my thing that I've been working on is sort of creating this parallel cartography and getting that out to the community. And it's it's not the easiest of things, and how do you get people to, because these, the anglicized names, they're very much internalized, right? Their usage is very common. Do you say that no, like that, even though that is popular usage, right? Even though that's popular practice, you shouldn't say it that way? Like, are you then not also again impinging on, changed traditions? It's complicated. And my thing is really, you need to create a situation where people have access to this information. Because there is you know, a number of problems occurring with the traditional way of transfer, which is oral transfer. Children aren't learning Spanish. People are moving away from the villages. People are no longer engaged in the traditional economic activities. And so all of this information, which used to have economic value, used to be relevant, suddenly is not, and therefore it is no longer talked about, and therefore is forgotten. You know, there's only so much you can do there. It's just really create a place where this is documented and that's accessible to the community. Anything else?
So what's the critical element? I know in your QP you talk about critical toponymy, and I know you had a lot that you were covering today. So wow, you did all kinds
So
of
the critical element is basically sort of, if you look at toponymy as a discipline, it sort of grows out of this etymologistic tradition, right? The only thing that people are interested in is this name, what is the etymology of it? You know, is it a Celtic name? Is it a Gaelic name? Is it, you know, is it a Visigothic name? Where does this name come from? Whereas sort of the critical aspect is looking at where is power located in these representations? What are the effects of power? That's state power, that's colonial power, that's capitalist power, that's any of the above, right? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What happened to you, man?